Welcome, everybody. This is our 10th annual virtual residency workshop. And this is the final day, Friday, June 28th, 2024. It's the first session of the day, and I want to welcome you all. Our session this morning is Reducing Barriers to Entry for New Users. Our moderator is Matthew Gorby, and I'm going to turn the show over to Matthew to introduce the panelists.
All right. Well, hello everyone, and thank you for coming this morning. I think we're just going to do a really quick introduction around. I don't know if we're all on the same order on each other's screen, so I'm just going to call folks out. Maitali?
Hi,
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Moitali Mitra. I work at Weill Cornell medicine now, but until last August, I was at Johns Hopkins University for 20 to 23 years. And early in my career, I was more in SQL and data, and then eventually moved into infrastructure for research. Thank you. I'm really happy to be here.
Maureen?
Hi, I'm Maureen Donlin. I'm at St. Louis University. I started out as a bench scientist and did that for about 30 years. I recently moved into my role as director of research computing, actually right as the pandemic shut us all down. But I honestly, for the last 25 years at SLU, I've been the de facto liaison between the basic sciences and IT. So it was kind of a natural progression for me to move into this role.
Nice. Pradeep?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Henry, first of all, for giving me this opportunity. So I'm basically a chemist and a bioinformatician right now transitioning to MIT, trying to come up with some sort of a nanotech-based AI and machine learning approaches. So how to data crunch, especially for image processing and so on, and also how to mitigate the dangers of AI when it comes to evidence-based and healthcare research and so on. Thank you.
Excellent. Dina?
Hi, my name is Dina Strong. I'm from the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, and I am probably one of the oddballs here in that I am primarily central IT web hosting with, accessibility and usability as my primary areas of focus, workflow, lifecycle, stuff like that. I have an MLIS, which is how I got connected up with the Research Data Service, which sits in our library. And so I am a connector between the people who come into the library needing technical help and the various technical services that are on campus. But I also do a lot of consulting and troubleshooting with those folks along the way. So that's me.
Excellent. Greta?
It's wonderful to be here. It's Greta Kellogg. I am currently Director of Strategic Initiatives at Penn State University for Institute for Computational and Data Sciences. And as I hear often, I had a unique journey coming through research computing, and I flip back and forth between enterprise IT and research computing IT. So I bring experiences with both, but recently came back to Penn State from being a founding director of the Epigenomics Core facility at Cornell, and now working with the Center for Applications of AI and ML to Industry.
Excellent. Dan?
Hi, I'm Dan Voss. I'm the Director of Research Computing for the Corewell Health Research Institute. It is a consortium of like 27 hospitals out of Michigan now. This is health research, but previously I was at two universities, University of Kansas and Florida State, doing research computing there. So I've transitioned to medical research, and I see we have multiple medical research focused in this group. That's grown a lot in the last few years, which is great, and because it's a very important area. And I love, more librarians and more diverse people helping out this research computing area. And I guess I should say I need to put AI ML in my name or title somewhere, because it seems to be the catchphrase that everyone wants to go forward.
Excellent. And John?
Good morning, everyone. I'm the Director of Informatics, Research Informatics at Dartmouth College. And we're actually changing our name to Research Facilitation shortly as of July 1. So some of this is very, very timely. I've been in research computing at Dartmouth for 28 years now. We've gone from 3 people to 25 people on the team. And before joining Dartmouth, I worked in research and development organizations in the high-tech industry.
Excellent. Yeah, and then my name's Matthew Gorby, and I'm at Northwestern University in the Research Computing Data Services Group as a senior computational specialist. And my background was in physics, in space science for about a decade, and then switched over to industry and worked for Cray and did some supercomputing work, and now I'm here doing research support. Excellent. So a couple of housekeeping things really quickly. I'm going to watch chat, so if folks want to put questions in there, I will stop the panelists and bring the questions up. Feel free to raise your hand, and we can do it. We don't have to wait till the end to do all the questions. We can kind of do them as we're going. Otherwise, just please keep yourself muted. And with that, I think I'm just going to start with the first question. So for the panel members, just answer whoever wants. Kind of in your experience, what are the top barriers that you see for new users entering into the space that we all work in? Oh, please.
So, I mean, one of the things that we focus on, this might sound a little businessy, but we really want to make sure someone understands the value of what they're going to do. So the technology really has to speak, whatever we're going to introduce to them has to speak to them somehow. And so we always try to focus on what's important to them. And it's more an exercise of listening, I think, to a large degree, and trying to understand what problem they're really trying to solve. So we focus on what's the value proposition, which I know sounds businessy, but that's truly what they really want to do something and accomplish something. So we try to understand what that is and try to make sure that we're clear about what that is before we engage with them, and that we've had that conversation as well.
So is that a barrier in that they don't recognize the value? Like you have to meet them somewhere?
Yeah, I think the tendency is for computational folks to speak in a language that doesn't make sense to many people out there as well. So I think, Henry, when he talks about the translation side of things and the facilitation side of things, I think that really hits things on the head, because they have to see why they're going to spend their time and energy, especially if you're working. I mean, most people are pretty busy with what they're doing. They have goals. Their goal is not to implement what you're trying to introduce to them. They have another goal, and so you have to show them how that takes them down the path to their ultimate goal.
Excellent. Does anyone else have a? Oh, please. Yeah.
Sorry about the misfire there. It took me a minute to find the right button.
No, Dina, you're fine.
Okay. So at my very first job in 1997, I was working at a startup which was like Department of Defense, secure infrastructure, yada, 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 like very deep in the guts of the operating system. And I distinctly remember one of the programmers telling me that the only reason that anyone would want a human-friendly interface was because they were not good enough and skilled enough to memorize the 16-character string that person had written. And this is like how people are supposed to keep government interfaces secure. Unsurprisingly, that badly documented system with a terrible interface, even on GUI, even on command line standards, you can make things more usable. They didn't. That business is no longer in existence. Fast forward 25 years plus, I firmly believe that we have the capacity to do better than we have been in terms of taking what the commercial world has taught us about this is how people think, this is design patterns. I have watched people with PhDs repeatedly click log out on an interface because they've been trained by every other interface they see that clicking their name leads them to account information. You're not going to break instincts like that just because you think that that was the easiest thing for you to program. it is worth doing usability testing. It is worth providing graphical user interfaces. If something is simple enough that it can be point and click, go ahead and make it that way. And if you have the capacity to make it free, or if you don't have the capacity to make it free and some other system on campus does, they're going to use the free system first, even if that's not what it's meant for. I could go on for a while. I'm going to stop here. So yeah.
No, you're fine. And I'm actually going to circle back around to recognizing the barriers, but on that line of thinking, right, like a lot of users want an enterprise system, and we're not running enterprise systems. We tend to run high performance computing systems, especially at university level. Like our systems are not as user friendly as enterprise systems. So are there anything that folks at their institutions have implemented from a technological standpoint, like you were saying, that isn't just a terminal? Like how do you reduce the barriers of entry from that side? Like, have you implemented ways for users to get into your ecosystem that isn't just a blank screen with a cursor? Oh, please.
The one thing that we've done successfully in getting new users onto HPC is using Open on Demand, which I realize comes with limitations for some types of calculations. But as far as just kind of getting them over that hump, that this is not the big scary thing that they need to worry about, then that's been quite effective. But I will echo it's what John said about the researchers have a very large amount of domain knowledge about something else. And they just want to get their answer. And they really don't give me the details, just help me get to do the analysis. And I think that's what gets lost, is that communication, that translation between what's possible computationally and what they're trying to do is probably the single biggest barrier.
I think Pradeep had their hand up first, and then Maithili.
Yeah, thank you. So, well, I mean, having been a user myself and also having trained some of the postdocs and PhDs, right? Well, I'm coming from both the terminal and also the browser-based and so on applications, right? So most of the people have challenges with, in my experience, with the initial setup and configuration. And where do you fetch the data that is being transferred from the CI, space to where exactly it's going? They cannot locate it. They need all these links. And how do you switch from the terminal mode or browser mode to terminal? So this switching is a huge problem, right? I mean, also when you show like where to transfer, and if there is a change in the operating system and also the file formats, this is a huge problem. And once something breaks, they have no idea what to do. And with that comes their challenge is to who is the right person to be contacted, and are there dedicated support channels for this? I mean, these things probably seem trivial, but for them it's a huge challenge.
That is right. Maithili, did you?
Yeah, so I've worked in health data or human subjects data, and so a couple of things. One is the barrier to entry sometimes is researchers saying it's too secure. Not too secure, but it's very stifling. The environment is too tight. So that's one thing. I am not deep in HPC. I've done up and down the stack in infrastructure. In my career, I've noticed that sometimes the biggest problem is the two sides of the barrier not understanding the nature of the barrier. How high is the barrier? What type is the barrier? Do I lower, I know we say lowering the barrier, but is it a matter of raising the platform? How do we, because that's what we want to do. Because if someone doesn't know how to do Linux programming, yes, we can teach it to them, maybe give them a couple of commands how to do parallel program, but then is that sustainable? So I think that understanding of what is the barrier requires a huge amount of institutional discipline. And we're not always well resourced to do that.
Dan, did you have a comment?
Yeah, so I came from universities, and now I work in healthcare also. And the interesting part is you guys are deep in the weeds of accessing terminals and Linux and coding. And I'm a step back. I have people who their priorities are patient safety, patient health. They've never been educated, have no classes in computing whatsoever. It's just only what they've learned on their own time, on their phone, on their cell phone. So med students, nurses, the priorities of the hospital are nothing to do with technology at all. It's can you get your patient data into a thing, and you want to do research. So then the burden comes on us is what do you do? So it's a different level of barrier. The barrier is they don't have any idea of what Linux is. They have no idea how to even do anything. And the other thing with healthcare too, and I know that's coming across in other areas, is security. When people block what you can install on your computers, how do you even install the tools you need to do what you need to do for research?
Excellent. And I wanted to back up just a little bit. Maureen was talking about open on demand, and just for everybody listening who doesn't know, it's a open free interface that you can implement that basically instead of it surfaces a web interface for folks, and it's a way to ask for resources instead of doing it through, say, Slurm or PBS on a command line. You're doing it through a web interface. There are generally applications that people can click on and say, oh, I want to run this thing and I would like these resources, and then it spins up a card for them and they can connect to it via a web interface instead of doing it through, say, an X11 or a GUI through the command line. So it just makes when you're talking about this raising our platforms instead of lowering people's expectations, like this definitely like kind of it raises it up so that we're meeting folks who aren't used to using a terminal directly. We actually had a couple of questions in the chat, and somebody's asking if folks know, this is a slight tangent, if, say, on any of the national resources like Access, are there anybody running open on demand currently?
I just added a link.
Oh, you did?
Oh,
thank you. Perfect.
No problem. Added the link so that everybody could have that. And then if I would summarize like what I've been hearing from everybody across the panel, it's like there's a lack of understanding of return on investment, a lack of awareness of how to interact with the systems in ways that are profitable to them. And also, like, was mentioned, these are folks which have highly specified, highly deep scientific knowledge in their areas of discipline. They would prefer not to learn a whole new discipline. They would like to not have to learn a whole new set of skills. They've already invested a lot of their time and energy.
Dina?
So I'm about to be heretical again. I'm a huge fan of the Carpentries. I've taught dozens of their classes. I've written a couple. And after having, one of the populations I work with a lot, there was an entire conference for people who self-identified as hesitant data scientists. Some of them went through the standard carpentries on the command line. At the end of those 2 days, that cohort of people was just exhausted and demoralized and dragging themselves out of the room as fast as they could. We did another version of that that was billed as with a graphical user interface. That one sold out in less than 2 hours. We had so much demand that we ran 3 more sessions of it. And at the end of that 2 days, same content, different interface. Those people were energized and brainstorming eagerly with each other about how they could take this home and directly apply this to their own lives. And I mean, I'm not going to argue with the real life user outcome. It's a small population, but the contrast was so stark and so clear that anytime that I know I understand the goal of the carpentry's philosophy of get people onto the command line and force them to use it. In my real world, in my real life, I will do what it takes to meet people where they are. And if where they are is not on a command line, I'll work with that because I would rather have them using any computing rather than having the go, this is too hard, I'm not going to take the time. There's also a slice of anything that you can get into a piece of software or into a web interface is going to be more accessible to people with disabilities. I can't see the difference between a colon and a semicolon anymore. I can't see the difference between a parenthesis and a curly bracket. You give me a command line, and I'm going to have to ask somebody else to do it for me. You give me a web browser where I can use the magnification systems and the font transformations and the reading aloud. I mean, a command line system is not going to be able to tell me where the curly brackets are out of balance with each other. A graphical user interface can. And that's transformational for me as a disabled person. And I'm not the only disabled person doing research.
Excellent, thank you. Yeah, I would actually have a question because I'm noticing that a similar theme that's coming up over and over is, I guess, like any relationship, it's communication. And so when we have this relationship with our users and we're having this communication mismatch, or do any of you at your institutions, have you implemented any strategies? Like, how do you do outreach? Like, how do you identify these populations and then pull them into some sort of training or bottleneck before they get into whatever our technologies are? John.
So I could spend a couple hours answering that question about segmenting populations and pulling them in, but we sort of have an approach where we task folks with identifying with and doing outreach to certain departments. And so everyone on my team has certain departments they engage with. And so we reach out to the chairs, we reach out to the labs there, we do lab up and runnings. So there's a lot of effort to break down those barriers to entry. And I think this is some of the things that we've been hearing over and over again here, which is to get people to an early win of some kind, get them to something that does something for them early in the process, whether it's a graphical user interface or, we treat people, have people trusted guides, we call them sometimes, where they help people get over those boundary conditions. We have lab up and runnings where we go in and engage with everybody in a lab. And we often try to identify someone in that group of graduate students and postdocs and faculty who will be someone to help us down the road to do things. And so they become an advocate or a force multiplier in that lab as well. So I think there's a lot of effort to try to get people to an early quick win, solve one of their early problems, speak in a language that they understand, to try to get them to the next step as you go along. But there's a whole bunch of things that we do in terms of outreach, in terms of strategy that we have aligned along certain pathways, and it aligns with a multi-year plan that we have in place as well.
And so do you meet them where they are with trainings, or are you doing outreach in order to pull them into some sort of centralized training?
Both. We do classes. So we have the carpentry classes, we have our own classes. We'll go into a lab and run portions of those classes. Usually it's something that will, choose bits and pieces from different things that we do to meet them sort of what their skill level is and what they need to accomplish. But the goal, especially in the ones that are really tailored for a department or lab, the goal is really to get people to where they can actually do something useful, to get past all those awkward mechanics so that they become facile enough to start to get their work done. And then we help. I mean, I feel like lucky where I'm at sometimes. Like, we do have the ability to not have to have everything be scalable, and not have everything be. We do have, compute clusters. We have big S&P machines. We have a, campus-wide file system. We have all these things that are scalable. We can work with people on an individual basis sometimes to get them up. And again, we target different departments depending on where we think things are most beneficial. I can talk about, we're working on a current Gen AI rollout and trying to figure out where these things are applicable. But, all of a sudden we have the ability to work with and process and provide additional value to unstructured and data that is not the same kind of data we've worked with for the last 30, 40 years. All of a sudden we can work with semantic data rather than really be stuck in the syntactic world that we've been in the past with traditional databases and things like that. So we're gonna, in the next year, do a push in the humanities that we haven't been able to do before, because we had nothing scalable. We had no scalable solutions. Now we do on that front. So So we do all of the above. We even do open houses sometimes where we just say, hey, we do poster sessions. So I did a poster session last summer. We had 5 or 6 students that worked for us over the summer. Part of their job was to produce posters at the end. We did a poster session. We had people come in and judge it. We had the president of Dartmouth come by and see those posters at one point during that process. So we do a whole series of things and nothing works. You can't point to any one thing and say that worked. But the momentum is sort of like in the advertising industry. You need a certain number of impressions on people. You need to be helpful for people. You need to solve their problems where they're at. And then you can potentially move up the stack to where you can work with more important problems for them as well.
And then I had a question about that, like just from say from a resource standpoint, that you're in a group that doesn't necessarily have the resources to go and do a lot of direct engagements with individual departments or lab groups and whatnot. Do folks have any strategies? Let's assume that you're resource bound. Does anybody have any ideas or strategies that you've done to reach, like if you have to do a more blanket approach to your institution to pull people in, have folks undertaken any of those sorts of efforts? Oh, yeah, please, Maureen.
We have twice a year, the Office of Vice President for Research organizes a research resources week where the different entities on campus that support research can make presentations hour long to faculty. It's targeting new faculty, but of course any faculty is welcome to join. And so we try to be part of that, to sort of reach out and say, hey, we're here, and highlight some of the things that we can offer.
Excellent. And Dina, I noticed you were putting quite a bit in the chat. Do you want to?
Sure. It's sort of a feast and famine thing. When we have time, we go and do as much outreach as we can at places where they already are. Everybody's bombarded at the beginning of the semester with new this, new that, new the other. And it's really hard getting time in the new faculty orientations, new staff orientations. But most departments that are large enough will have, a monthly lunch and learn or all staff meeting or something. If you can get into those are the most reliable things that I found that don't happen specifically in August when everybody's brain is full and they're all rushing around anyway. I'd also look at, student interest groups. We call them registered student organizations. And so anytime that you can get where the students are, particularly where the grad students are, I think that is going to help you. And I honestly don't know what it was that exploded about our hesitant data scientist session. I was not expecting to sell out within a couple of hours and then have to spin up 2 more instances to double the demand. There would have been demand for an entire series of them, but this was not our day jobs, and we were all exhausted at the end of it. So it hasn't happened since, but I really wish we had the capacity to make it happen again.
Yeah, I'm going to make one comment and then John. Something persistence we've noticed as well is that we did office hours. And so for the first year, just nobody, maybe somebody would come, nobody. And then it reached this inflection point. And then now there are people coming regularly. But it was interesting because we were there sitting every week at the exact same time. And so it seems that consistency, even if it seems like it's not working at first, pays longer term dividends. John, did you have a comment?
I was just going to say, and reinforce what people said, campus-wide classes is one of the big ones. We probably teach between 40 and 60, we call them workshops, probably a better term, 40 to 60 workshops a year. And a lot of them are sequential, so people can self-select into their skill level or lack of skill level, and they can take them again. There's no charge for that kind of thing. And we do embedded office hours where people are sitting in the departments. I did that. I was in the chemistry department for 10 years, sitting there, and there's an old expression called management by wandering around, and I called it making friends by wandering around, where if people don't come up to you, you go and talk to someone you helped the week before and see how they're doing, kind of thing. So I think it's that contact. You can do scalable things like the courses and workshops, and you can do the individual things in departments as well.
Excellent. Anyone else have unique strategies they've tried? And I guess also on those lines, we're kind of talking about the greatest hits, like the ways that were the things that are working well. But I'm sure that that's living on top of a pile of mistakes. And so does anyone have any anecdotes about things that they've tried for outreach or to get users into your ecosystem that maybe haven't gone so well? Oh, please.
Well, not gone so well, but at at JHU there was a Teams channel for the data scientists. And like you said, it was a few at the beginning, it was a few people, but when that was combined with in-person workshops or lunch and learns, it really took off.
Mm.
And because it was Teams, and I'm trying, I don't have Microsoft Share, or maybe I don't, but that's not why I'm saying this. But it's that in Teams versus like other places, or you can also have this in Slack, whatever. You can put the documentation there, and it's much easier to kind of have everything in one place. So I felt like that asynchronous, way to communicate was very helpful for people. People would pose a question and other people would answer or put some snippet of sample code. So that worked really well.
That's great. Yeah, I guess maybe to shift to that a little bit. Speaking of messaging, like we're talking about in-person engagements and whatnot, but do folks have things like that, like a Teams channel that's open broadly, or do people use Slack or a Discord server in order to get community engaged with each other?
And all of the above, right?
Oh,
So
okay.
Slack and Teams with some of the projects that are together with some of the faculty labs. The director sends out a newsletter once a month, and we also have, because Penn State University has so many colleges and so many campus locations, we have specific co-hires in each of the departments in each of the colleges in order to kind of infiltrate is the word that's coming to mind, but that's not the best word. But it's kind of like, to find your champions, right, in each of the areas and have them be part of a closer community so that they can then turn around and spread the word. And so that community then is brought together in like luncheons, lunch and learns. But I really also appreciate the conversations about going to them for their symposiums, for their meetings, for their faculty as well. Another thing that I would mention that I'm not sure how many schools have implemented, Penn State has a RISE team, which is senior scientists that are software engineers or data specialists. And what we do is there was an initial, underwriting of the staff salaries, but then we bring them and have them be a part of faculty funded projects so that they can share their expertise and the faculty can have a much less expensive way to have that layer of expertise with HPC systems as a part of their project, but then they don't have a long-term hiring commitment either, right? They could have somebody and they can have them for a couple of months to train up their postdocs, or they can have them for a couple of years if it's a multi-year project. And then the idea is that there's a transfer of skill sets, and then there's some continuity, there's some GitHub repos, there's some ability to provide documentation that's long-standing so that there can be, reproducible publication work over time. And that also speaks volumes to the different disciplines in the communities.
Well, also speaking of when we were talking about the different ways to message, like having active, live, or archived messaging from users to users, have people noticed any shifts in communication with different generations that are coming in? Like are there, we have a lot that researchers are a lot younger and they're from a different generation that communicate differently. And so are there ways that you're meeting like a new generation of researchers where they're at in terms of how they want to communicate versus the traditional, in-person or Zoom calls or whatnot?
Yeah, maybe I could add. I mean, it's more of also an addition to what Greta left. So what we did was we had a weekly meeting for 2 hours, and we kind of segregated people based on their background. I mean, basically, they're all young researchers, but who have a more of background, let's say, from who understand the data architecture and so on. So if we categorize them, and then what we did was the kind of training we did, we asked them to pass on to, the next level. So, and this led to a chain of, a much better understanding. And within 2 months, they were also able to communicate much better to the data service providers and, the core facility from CI. So I think this led to a kind of spark in them. And then that was like, if not all of the problems were solved, majority of the problems, came to a halt.
Excellent. Yeah, there seems to be a common theme, is this kind of cascading, getting in touch with a couple of people and getting them excited and deep into it, and then that just kind of trickles out. But it's interesting because that has a that tapers off, it fizzles, right? And we have a community of people who are constantly turning over. And so if you think, the people with the experience are popping out the top, and inexperienced people are coming into the bottom. Do people have things like, what are the things that you found have helped the most consistently with new users, instead of, because this is all great for the community that you have now, but what about the community that's constantly coming in, that's fresh and new?
So I think, just quickly to go back about the generational thing.
Oh yeah, please.
I think that the virtual trainings are fantastic for newer generations. That's what they like. I think, you can't generalize about a whole generation, but generally the work group seems to be less in person, because of the pandemic as well. So I feel like virtual training has taken off. What I find is not so much a generational difference as much as a discipline difference, right? Like different groups are going to express different concerns and where to go with it, and to get them in. Often I think that they are more comfortable with the same generation trainers. So my son is a data scientist, and he works at it. So I kind of hear from him that he wouldn't say like, oh, it's almost like we don't speak their language. Like that's how I feel. And they get very excited if someone's not an adult. It's like, oh, they're not a grown-up. They're normal. I'm like, what do you mean normal? Like, okay. So I think that's very fun for them, and fun and feeling good is very important for that generation. And so I think that it's not so much laziness, because I used to think that, but I think it's a different style of reaching out to them. But I think the good thing is that they really respond often to digital communication better.
I'm sorry, I'm so busy typing. I wanted to jump in with the people have told me when they meet me in Zoom or in a non-text based venue, I have heard from more than one person, "You're 50. I thought you were 23." Apparently, I type young. But one thing that I have found that works across generations, if you can get them to the initial consult, is setting up the, tell me your problem, let's troubleshoot it together, and if there's something I can demonstrate for you, let's hit record, and then we get, hopefully the recording will be less than 20 minutes. You can chunk it up into smaller pieces, or you can put flags in if you don't have the editing time. Get it as close as you can to the YouTube format, because that saves the rewriting time. That gives them this is exactly what I'm looking for. That gives them a searchable text transcript. It's self-documenting in the time that you took to have the meeting. They can take that and grab the clips that are useful to them. And
right. And
Yeah.
And seconding that for what Dina is saying too, like we're started a YouTube channel again with those like little videos because the generation coming up now knows how to swipe before they know how to wipe. You know, they grew up from toddlerhood knowing these little micro videos, and it's a content and it's a way of learning and it's a way of sharing that is pretty common, I guess,
Yeah,
for them.
I had a friend to give their child a Game Boy, like an old original Game Boy, and they were just swiping and looking offended, like this is not working how it's supposed to. And I was like, oh right, yeah, everything's changed so much. I think Dan mentioned in the chat also, right, we're talking about like YouTube and maybe cutting the video up, but has anybody tried actual short form content, like a very quick TikTok sort of video or whatnot? I certainly haven't. I'm wondering if folks have implemented that sort of thing.
I haven't done it with like formal production values, formal TikTok, sound, music, yada yada, because it my solution to getting everybody wants custom hand holding, but they also want documentation is just to do that documentation in that consult meeting. So they know they have their recording for their team. And at that point, they don't particularly care about the TikTok production values, but that's my audience. Other folks may have different outcomes, in terms of using it for broader scale promotion.
Oh, please. Oh, Maureen, you were muted. There you go.
Can I ask a really stupid question?
Of course.
How do you expose I am nearly 60, so I am not a digital native. How do you record those videos when you're doing the in-person consults?
I don't do in-person consults because I'm disabled. I'm full-time remote.
Oh,
So
sorry.
every
Okay.
connection that I have is over Zoom and over Teams.
So you just record it.
Yeah, we're chatting along. We're like, okay, we figured out how to do this patch. We're not going to remember this 6 months from now. Let's hit record. Let's just recap what we learned. Hit stop, done.
Okay, so just through Zoom yeah, got it.
Yeah,
So
John.
Maureen, I've started using Zoom locally using the AI assistant, which doesn't suck. It actually is, it doesn't do a terrible job. So I've been using Zoom locally for meetings as well. So sitting down with somebody and we'll just do the meeting in person and Zoom. So you just, you mute, you mute things so that you don't get any echo kind of thing going on, and you can work together on things. So if you have any screen sharing tools, you can do that as well. So I found that super, super helpful on an individual basis to let them capture things. The other thing that I don't do as much anymore, because I'm not, in front of individual users as much, but what I used to always do is I would draw people a pic, because I'm a visual thinker. I would draw people a picture of sort of how everything worked. Because when you teach people, like, here's how you SSH in, here's the computer, here's your file system, here's this stuff, most people don't see the picture because they don't have enough experience to know how all these things connect. And how do they get through the VPN? How come they can get to this thing here and they can't get, to that there? Why? So we have a secure compute environment for medical data that we support as well. So why do I have to do this for that? So I like to always draw people a picture because we have it in our minds because we've done this forever of how everything works. And I can tell you that every time I've done that, I do it in my notebook every single time. Every single time they say, can you tear that out for me? And let me take that with me, or they'll take a picture of it. So I think one of the big things that does help people is to understand how everything connects together, because we have all these little bits and pieces. And even if you have a web interface to something and they send a job into a batch queue, I mean, what does that mean? They don't know what that means actually. And they don't know what the impact of it is. And they don't understand that if they send 10,000 jobs in there, that they might not get those jobs to run because of this, some of the queue decisions that are made. So I do try to give them a visual all the time of sort of how all these little bits and pieces connect together and how they impact one another. And this goes back to, what is different about this generation now? And I would say it started a while ago, but the level of impatience and resilience to things not working is lower now. Like they push a couple buttons. If things don't go the way they need them to go, they're gone, kind of thing. You've lost them. And so I think the people from before, like when you sort of grew up when things mostly didn't work most of the time. I mean, that was the world used to be. Most things didn't work most of the time, you sort of expected things not to go your way. And so you're like, okay, this won't work. And when it did work, you were shocked, kind of thing. And that world has changed. That mentality has changed, where things mostly work most of the time. But when they don't, people do have challenges with that and can't push through on their own as much.
Greta?
Um, just to come back from what you're saying, John. One of the things though that I think gets lost, and I know that I coach people about this all the time, is we're still looking at doing science. And when you're looking at doing science, you have to expect it to fail most
Mhm.
of the time. If you're not failing most of the time, then you're not exploring, you're not discovering something new, you're not developing something that's different, that's pushing the edge and pushing the envelope. And so I try to explain to new folks coming in or folks that get like frustrated very easily. It's like you're looking to fail in a different way. Fail somewhere different, and then you're making progress. And we don't want we want the systems to be rock solid, and we want all the software that they utilize to be there for them, and we want the accessibility to the nodes to be very, very convenient. But I always talk to the next generation about either whether it's project management or whether it's like the students. It's like it's science. It's supposed to fail. You're supposed to be learning how to pick up and do it again.
Exactly. I mean, they're all there to learn, and it's not just absorbing new material and regurgitating it. It's trying things and then failing. And we have that encoded in our team's sort of, I don't want to call it a mission statement, but it's like, how do we do our work? So we have a whole bunch of things in there, and we steal from the high tech world, which is, fail fast and learn from your mistakes and fail early as well, which goes back to someone mentioned the idea of design thinking. We apply a lot of design thinking to the projects that we do. And we try to do things in a very iterative way. We're not, we've tried agile as an approach to things, but we're not really like truly agile, but we're very incremental in the way we solve things. So we fail early, we try to learn, we adjust, and we make it, take a different path as we go through things. So, but again, people bring in different psychological things around failure. And I think we almost need another word for failure rather than, because it's not failure. It's, you tried something, it didn't
Trial
work,
and error.
learned, but we need a different word for exploration or non-successful exploration or something like that. So it needs to be a German word that's about 20 syllables long to describe it. So.
Yeah, that's a tough thing to balance though, because right, our users are trying to get a paper out the door, or their PI is breathing down their neck, or like we have folks who are not necessarily in our ecosystem to learn. They're there to get something done,
Yeah.
and maybe at the expense of learning skills that would help them in the longer term versus their short term gain. I feel like it's a hard balancing act, and I don't know
I'm gonna
exactly. Oh,
I'm going to
please.
push back on that one just a little
Oh,
bit.
yeah, great.
I know that a lot of us come from the background where it's like it's an educational institution. We're supposed to be here to philosophically teach. Um, I have both found in my own extremely over busy, too many projects, not enough time life, and with the people that I'm working with that are in the same time crunch, except with the added bonus of I at least know I'm getting paid. These people are on soft money, right? They have to have results. They have to have them fast. They don't have the luxury of learning in the, philosophically ideal world. And so if what I can give them, I understand the mindset of this is what I have time to learn today. Give me what I need to know today. I'll come back next week if I have time, but oh God, I don't know if I have time, right? That's where they're living. I want to help them survive. We're all just trying to keep our heads above water here.
Great. And I want to circle back to this, but we have our first audience question. Sean, do you wanna pipe up?
Hi, yeah, thank you for the wonderful discussion. But yeah, I have a little bit of an opinion to add there, and the idea that I like to pitch is that the cluster or HPC systems or research computing systems are like labs, right? And oftentimes, I think, or these days, as we've kind of mentioned here, it seems like that's often forgotten. You want the thing to work, you're used to the phone, you get the instant gratification. But if you think about like a student that's going into a chemistry lab, an optics lab, you're going to that confocal microscope. That thing isn't easy. It never will be easy. And I think that somewhere along the line, we've lost the sight of maybe there is that challenge. Maybe that's part of the research experience, right? Which is you can't make the confocal microscope necessarily, you know, like just click and, and swipe and do all that stuff, right? And the cluster, the research computing, we try to do that a little bit, but, maybe there is something to be said that, these research tools are indeed part of the learning process, part of the research process, right? And that's it.
That's one of the things that we've it took us a while to get full institutional funding for our cluster. I had built in my earlier life, I was a computer science trained and systems kind of person. It took 3 generations of clusters and pitching the institution on the concept of we're building a computational lab, a shared computational instrument, shared computational lab, pitching that, and then finally getting some NSF money from a shared instrumentation a grant process that we finally convinced the institution to fully fund our not in we have a shared co-op model where researchers can buy in as well and get more resources, but the institution funds the core cluster that we have. And it was really that shared model. And I unfortunately had to use the analogy of the library sometimes as well as a shared research space. But we did have to take them out of their mindset of thinking about things in the physical world and taking them into sort of more virtual, remote world. But that is what sold the Dartmouth, anyways, on the idea of funding the cluster as a shared resource across the campus, it is a laboratory for doing work, for doing experiments, and for learning.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I wanted to, this is going back a couple of conversations, but when you were talking about drawing, just anecdotally, I wanted to put my hat into that ring as well, is that recently doing a couple of like a GitHub training. And, we can go through the syntax all we want, but as soon as I was drawing a schematic of a tree and where upstream is and whatnot, everyone's like, oh, and so then the conversation went great from there. Or even whenever we're talking about our cluster and drawing the InfiniBand fabric and like here's how it connects to the compute nodes and here's the login nodes and how folks go in, like it goes from an abstract thing to that. And so on those lines, like right, everybody has different learning styles, right? People are kinetic, people are visual. Do folks take those things into account when you're designing your trainings or when you're talking, or let's say folks who have disabilities, or like how do you reach out to those users, or are we pretty homogenous with regards to how we're doing our trainings, or do you take those things into account when you're designing your outreach? And if so, like how do you do it?
For me personally, it helps. I thought I was an advocate before I got hit with the disability stick, and I learned so much about how much I didn't know. And so it's gone from something I tried to keep in mind to something that I must have in order to function. So that's changed my own personal perspective on how I design and implement trainings a lot.
And then do you like right, so like you came to that realization after you had a disability, and now do you know who within an institution you'd reach out to help you with your trainings? Because I think a lot of us probably don't have the experience in what we need to change. Do you have advice in terms of who to reach out to in order to get help with that?
So I already was that person,
Oh, okay.
unfortunately. So I had been trained in accessibility methods, and I'm lucky to have been because I knew what I needed to do and what I needed to change. Our university also has something called the IT Accessibility Liaison Program. A lot of you may be needing something like this. I was mentioning Title II in the intake interviews. For a lot of us, within 2 to 3 years, everything that we do that is end user facing is going to have to be accessible because of the way that law was strengthened. And it is both a fantastic opportunity and an unfunded mandate. So if accessibility has not been on your mind, talk to me because we're all going to be climbing this hill together.
All right, you heard it here. Talk to Dina.
My boss may be about to kill me. But if your university doesn't have something like IT accessibility liaisons, which is, someone or ideally more than one person in each department who is trained on this stuff. I encourage you to start building a system like that now, because you're going to need it.
And Matthew, to go back to your question, which I think was about sort of multimodal training pathways, it's hard. Like generating good video content is difficult.
Yeah.
And I'm hopeful that because there's so much stinky video content that everyone's watching now, that we can do more reality TV training where it doesn't have to be production ready, but it used to have to be production quality to do things, because you couldn't get people to sign off on putting things out the door. And I'm also hopeful, and I've been trying for a while to get some of the LLM tools that are out there to basically, I don't know if you know those little sketches where as someone's talking, they draw a little diagram of all the components, how everything works together. That's a huge amount of work if you do that by hand, but there are tools out there that can do that now as well. So I'm thinking that there will be a lot of different ways, and this will be one of the benefits, I think, of communicating to those younger generation is they don't need everything to be a big studio production in terms of consuming things. They're used to consuming shorts. And so we'll actually be able to do things that don't have high quality production. And we've done a little bit of this already, and it works fine. The big challenge was getting higher level people to say it's okay to put that not so great video out the door. But from our perspective, it conveyed all the information we needed to convey. And so that's one of the translations, getting that generation that's used to high production levels and wants to control the messaging to, we just want to get people information out the door. And I sort of go back to one of the reasons when I first started, I started doing a lot of training right away because there was too much work to do. I couldn't keep answering the same questions over and over again. So I think the idea that we use these things as training as a force multiplier of our information, what we have out there. And I think there will be new ways to do that, more multimodal ways, especially with some of these tools that are out there. And I keep trying to find something that will do the trick for me, but they can generate full videos now. So we could have a transcript of this whole meeting, and we could create a video of it, probably with images within a year or two of what all the concepts that we talk about. So there will be an explosion here, I think.
And this, so our student program, like our student workers, that's actually where we found a lot of value with our student workers is in producing video content. And because you can do it without a high degree of understanding of the systems. And so it's a really good way to get them engaged early. And it gives a lot of value to it's leveraging our students who are in the same generation, speaking the same language, who are comfortable producing videos. Anyway, this is just an anecdote.
That's a good idea. Yeah, that's a really good idea.
Oh, please, Dina.
Let me throw one more in here. The most successful training program our help desk ever did was when we had a couple of art students who wanted to make a game. The students were so into getting the high score on that game, right? It took work, but the outcome, I think, was really worth it because it's been 15 years since that game was produced, and the current generation of students are still talking about it.
That's really neat. Oh yeah, and then speaking, actually, since it's the hot topic, machine learning and AI, are folks, I know everything's kind of in the fledgling stage, but are folks actually utilizing any of these tools right now? Like you're saying to do transcripts when you're doing a Zoom call. Dan?
Yeah, so we're just starting this as more in meetings with researchers, but we use it for some of our Teams meetings and things, and it does an amazing job of summarizing and giving bullet points and telling you next steps. It's pretty phenomenal, and I think like what Dina was doing with her video and her consults, it would speed up that process so much because it is very useful. And I'm gonna first say I'm jealous of all your institutions that have all the support and funding and people and everything else for small. I'll speak to small places and also not universities. That it is what we can do to scale ourselves because we are more boutique. You need to use and these tools like the new AI tools. There's something called Fireflies, which you don't have like a Microsoft Copilot or another way to summarize things. These things can be used on top of Zoom routines and do these transcriptions and summarizations for you, and it's amazing. And I think one of my thoughts too is the ML thing is tickets, right? We used to try to do tickets by hand and organize and summarize for some of our common FAQs. throw that at machine learning. You could do a lot better with that, trying to get that to people.
That's great. Yeah, maintaining a knowledge base. I'm hoping the AI at some point can jump in there. So John and then Dina.
So we've been engaged actively for about 18 months now with trying to get LLMs out into the community and trying to find use cases. Sometimes we're searching for the use case on things. Internally, my team is doing some training where we're going to train ourselves this summer. And we have a couple of people who have some experience with building RAG models. So we're currently actually building a RAG model, and I'm involved in this as well, a RAG model for our knowledge base. The challenge.
What is a RAG model?
Oh, retrieval augmented generation. So
Okay.
it's basically a way, the easiest way to think about it is, and I'll take one term to task, this concept where they talk about hallucinations in LLMs is sort of an anthropomorphic approach to what these things are doing. There's no thinking going on. So they're not hallucinating, they're just producing a wrong answer according to what we want, because it's just a statistical model. So, but a RAG model is basically a way to constrain the answer space to your domain space. And so a good example is the one I just mentioned, is if you have a knowledge base and you want the answers for a chatbot to only come from that knowledge base, you can use a generally trained LLM and then use a RAG model to basically constrain those answers that come out of that chat box to from the input that came from your knowledge base. The challenge that you always have is if you don't have a good knowledge, or you have bad information in your knowledge base, your chatbot is going to perpetuate that bad information, which is what we're having a problem with right now, which is, I don't know if everyone has a great knowledge base for their own internal uses. We don't. We have answers, but a lot of them are not so good. And so it's the old garbage in, garbage out model on things. But I've also, in the last couple of years, so I will say, I mean, I know COVID was a terrible, terrible thing, but there were some things that I've been trying to get through for 15 years that I finally was able to get through after COVID, because people changed the way they thought about things. And one of those things has been these institutional wide, we call them challenge grants, but they're really call for proposals, where we internally say, hey, send us your proposals. And I target certain areas each year. Send us your proposals and we'll grant some of you people research computing time to execute on those proposals. And we can bring in systems people, we can bring in resources, and we can bring programmers in to do certain things. And we can bring, my folks in who are, data wranglers and programmers, whatever you want to call them, to get things done. And the last year we did a call for proposals for generative AI grants. And we had about 20 proposals come in the door from all across the institution. And we're actually, because of the staging of, we ask people when we can work with them, whatever, we're actually able to work on almost all of those at this time to one degree or another, with help from other folks, from other departments as well, involved in this as well. So we've been actively doing this for quite a while. We're going to roll out a bunch of things this fall in terms of training. We have a ai.dartmouth.edu where we've stood up a bunch of models. What we haven't done is we don't have a model that we can put onto medical data yet. We do have secure compute environment for medical data. We haven't implemented any models in there that we could use, and we'll work on that at some point in time as well. So,
Dina.
A +1 to the garbage in, garbage out problem. The biggest problem that I've seen with our chatbots so far has been, okay, that knowledge base article that you trained it on was 5 years out of date. The chatbot can't do better than what you feed it. And sometimes it doesn't do as well as a human. We've recently banned read.ai on our campus because it behaves like a worm. Any meeting that is invited to, it then tries to propagate through the entire calendar and into all of the neighbors' calendars. If you sign in and log in, you have to go and dig deeply to extract it. So we just said, we have FERPA and HIPAA data running around here. We can't afford for that to be drinking up stuff when we don't know what it's going to do with that data, or where it's going, or how we could control it. So we are just taking that out of our ecosystem. So I would say use AI intelligently and with care, but just because it says AI on it doesn't mean, oh, we've got to use this immediately right now without investigation. Among my personal issues with it was my boss actually in real life uh, throws axes. She has an axe throwing setup in her backyard. We were teasing her about this. The
I wouldn't tease her
AI,
too much.
yes, the AI transcript is now convinced that my boss is an axe murderer, right? There, there are boundaries and sort of bumper cars to that a human being still needs to set on these.
Right. Pradeep, did you have a comment?
Yeah, that was quite funny. But then, on a serious note, and to add more to what John was mentioning earlier, I mean, coming from structural biology background, and it's pretty getting too integrated or integrative these days, and with the efforts from, I mean, DeepMind and predictive tools, uh, I think it's more garbage in, and we don't know what's up. So this definitely leaves us with a, I mean, serious problem. What holds for further downstream applications and discoveries that the dangers to these kind of AIs pose, and also what holds in public repositories. I mean, how do we validate,
Hmm.
right? So this, I think we are really at a crossroads to use AI. I mean, in a sense, because it's not typically AI. There is already, I mean, data points across from, folds of the proteins and information of the atoms, the file formats, and so on and so forth. So they all, if we go wrong in any of one of those stages, AI is bound to go wrong everywhere else. So yeah, I think this is something as a community, I think we should be uh, aware of it. Also, be careful when we have to implement it in academic or scientific ways. So that's 2 cents. Thank
So, there are a lot of concerns with AI, and we have people looking at the ethics of it, and how does it fit into the classroom? How does it fit into research? How do you attribute it? I've basically told my team that our job, unless we hear otherwise, is just try to make things work for people. It's another tool. It has a lot of challenges. There's no question about it. But at the end of the day, it's a tool. And one of the really big wins that I see happening for us this fall will be we've spent years teaching the entire campus how to program because so many things have become programmatic over the years. You get data from instruments, it has to get to somewhere else. You have to do some kind of ETL on it and consume it some other place. And we still find labs and people doing things by hand. And so we've become the basically the people who teach all the graduate students how to program and the faculty how to program because a lot of them didn't go through a computer science program or didn't take programming classes. The ability for them to actually get to productive programming, we use it on our team. We use some of the code generation tools in Gemini already on our team. We use some of the code generation tools in ChatGPT on our team as well. The ability to get to productive code, the time to that is reduced by an order of magnitude for these people. You can basically write pseudocode and come up with working Python in seconds. And so earlier when I talked about helping people see the value proposition of things, the value proposition for anyone who is trying to code a data pipeline using some of these tools is tremendous. And so we're gonna do more training around that come this fall. We're going to train, do a test case. We do soft openings in the summer for new technology. So your first question, how do you introduce new technology? We basically eat our own dog food in the summer. So we learn things, we teach ourselves those things, we critique it, and then we do a soft opening to friendlies, and then we go out and start to roll it out to campus kind of thing. So this fall, we're going to see an explosion of people's ability to program across campus because we'll teach them how to use some of these tools. And then we won't have to teach them the basics of Python anymore, maybe for the rest of our lives ever. So,
Well, I think we're kind of coming down to the last 5 minutes here. So I wanted to mention one thing. There is a lot of great resources that have come up in the chat. So if people are looking for information on Open on Demand or any of these, the ML and AI bits that we've been talking about, people have been posting links. So make sure you check that out. So I wanted to hold the last 5 minutes just for any last questions from our audience or any comments the panel wants to make. Thank you so much for this great discussion. If not, I have one other topic that I'll drop a bomb right at the end if people are still want to. So okay, in that case, in keeping to the kind of the hot topic, this is a barrier to entry for new users in terms of from a financial standpoint, is that we're seeing the cost of GPUs, and specifically when you're looking at, a single 4 by H100 node costing $130,000 or whatever it is. Like, how are you making these resources accessible and equitable to your user base? Because that's a huge, if people are using the traditional system of purchasing dedicated resources for their computation, like that's a massive barrier to entry. So how are you helping your users with regards to accessing technology that's maybe financially outside of their reach? Oh, please.
So we do a lot of work in the cloud. So in that case, there are HPC clusters in the cloud that one can spin up. It's not the same, I understand, as having it on-prem or have that kind of power, but we have often negotiated with the vendors for the major cloud providers if they would give a little bit of credit for students to use. So that's one way to do it.
Oh, John?
So we run our cluster as a cooperative model. So the institution provides some core funding for it, and then researchers are allowed to buy in. And part of the premise there is that when you buy in, we make more things available to you when you need them. But when you're not using your stuff, it's available to the community. So we have bitten the bullet and bought some $130,000 GPU boxes, like for GPUs and but then we try to make them generally available. And we have some weird systems now as to how we fund things, where we actually borrow against future revenue. And so just to my team is also a server center. We do charge people for our time, a portion of our time, for some of the projects that we do. We do charge people for some of the resources that they use above and beyond. So we have a model of everybody gets something for free. To go beyond that, we need to talk to you about how do we create a sustainable model for everybody in the future, which is basically a show me the money kind of ask.
Right.
Do it in a very kind and gentle and consultative process, but we do that.
And do you do it in a, say, pay-per-use model, or do you do it in a like purchasing dedicated resources that can also be used by other people model?
All of the above.
Okay.
All of the above. So, we try. I feel like I'm a deal maker all the time now. We make deals of one kind or another for our time. So, in the humanities, they don't have a lot of money. When we have projects that we want to support there, when I do our MOUs or our statements of work, we basically we say, we're going to give you all this money. It's going to cost you $25,000. Oh, we're going to grant you $25,000 of our time. So we make deals to respond to the institutional needs and desires coming from above at some level, as best we're able to understand that. And again, it's a navigation process all the time for doing that. But for funding hardware, we have shared resources. Everybody gets a little bit. If you need a lot, we got to talk to you about more. So,
Matthew, in the Midwest, in Oklahoma and Kansas, we have a GPU network that's available, and users can log into a machine and get GPU cycles to run a problem, and then when they're finished, they relinquish them. So we have a network of GPU resources on the internet.
Is that through Access, Phil?
It's new to me, so I can't tell you. But Henry would tell you exactly what's going on. But it's a very clever idea to provide racks and racks of GPUs, and then if you need one, you need 100, an A100, you go get it and use it for an hour and let go of it. Okay, so they don't sit idle in labs all the time and are only available to the contract for that project. They're available to many people, and I think it's a great shared resource idea, and it works well. Okay,
I agree. And that's actually a perfect segue because we're just out of time. I was going to ask Henry if there's anything else that he would like to say, or
No, I think you all did a fantastic job saying it. So I really, yeah. Okay, Matthew looks all shocked with that. My answer is I don't have anything to add. Okay, so I'm gonna stop the recording.